Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harshita Sherwa, and I'm here to introduce our guest lecturer for today's session, Mr. Siddharth Bhansali. He's the CEO and founder of Gnosis Tech, leading in technology products and solution agency. Founded in 2009, Gnosis Tech has grown from two members team serving three clients to a 30 technical skilled team servicing over 50 clients from across industries such as FMCG, BFSI, and automotive, to name a few. Their key clients include Deloitte, True Ventures, Stylecracker, and Shari Khan. A passionate drummer and bass guitarist, Siddharth Bhansali is graduated with a degree in Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the prestigious Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California, and he was immediately hired by globally acclaimed management and risk consultancy firm Protiviti. After his graduation in 2008, at Protiviti, Siddharth was a part of selected team that was responsible for the digital transformation of the firm's knowledge management practice. This experience helped him realize the power that technology interventions can bring in unlocking value for business and led him to start his own ventures, Gnosis Limited, Gnosis Knowledge Solution Private Limited, with a mission of helping pursue exponential growth through digital innovation. In 2020, Gnosis Tech partnered with Zoom Media. So, sir, we are honored to have you here, and we just can't wait for you to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshita, and thank you to everybody here on this call.
I'm delighted to introduce our second guest speaker for this evening, Mr. Mandar Sohoni. Mandar Sohoni is Associate UI UX Director at Noesis Tech and the UI UX Manager at Foxy Moron. With in-depth knowledge of human-computer interaction, navigation, and usability for UI design, he has over 7+ years of experience in creating user-centric, usable, and intuitive user experiences and designs for websites and mobile applications. He has a vast range of experience working with a wide spectrum of clients in the field of fashion, retail, FMCG, sports, finance, and real estate. Mandar is also extremely well versed in design thinking, UX research, interaction design, wireframing, user interactive prototyping, animation, graphic design, and designing beautiful user-centric interfaces, coupled with art direction and project management. He is also skilled in tools like Axure, Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, Photoshop, and Illustrator. We wish you a very warm welcome, Mandar.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for that warm welcome. Mandar and me are both really pleased to be here and have an opportunity to talk to the next generation of designers, entrepreneurs about this craft that we love very much called user interface and user experience design. And we hope that you find everything we share with you today insightful and inspiring. And, we'd love to hear questions from you guys and hope to answer all of them as well. On that note, Mandar, why don't we get started? Do you want to share the
Sure.
deck that we've put together?
Sure. Yeah. Just a second.
Thank you. So we've put, a couple of slides together to walk you all through our experience in the UI UX industry, our understanding of it, how we do it, and of course where we think the future is, where we think the future is going to be. Great. I'll get started. Mandar, you want to go to the next slide? We can actually skip the intro as well. Great. So So before we get into what UX and UI is, of course, everybody has heard of this term UI UX designer, for a long time. But how long exactly? Like, how many years has this craft or this profession of UI UX actually been around? Do you all think this is an old job or is this a new job? How young is this job of UI UX that we're all, this profession of UI UX we're here to discuss today? Mandar, next slide, please. So if you do a quick research on the popularity of the search term UI UX, right? I mean, this is a tool that Google provides that tells you, hey, how when have people started searching for this term? You'll realize that UI UX has only really come into the Indian space around 2010. right? So you're talking about an occupation, you're talking about a practice that is today just about 10 years old, right? And that's really young when you think about an entirely new career, when you think about an entirely new designation within a company, an entirely new practice that people follow. Now, what was happening around 2010, right? There's a reason that UI UX blew up in 2010 in India. And that reason is the devices some of you guys might be using to access this call today, right? It was in 2010 that the mobile explosion actually happened in India. It was in 2010 that we started looking at the internet as more than just a way to find information, but also a way to communicate and collaborate with each other. Until 2010, specifically for India, maybe not for the entire world, we were very much in what we all call the web version 1.0, right? Where websites at that time and the internet at that time were primarily about giving you information, were not really that much about taking information from you or connecting you with people around the world. So, with the advent of Facebook and other social networks at that time, people started realizing that commerce can actually happen through the internet, that businesses can interact with customers through the internet. And when that became obvious, logic then dictated, hey, what is the best way for me to talk to people through this new medium? And that's where UI UX actually sort of started booming, right? And as you've seen from this graph, the internet, the interest in UI UX has just consistently been increasing since then. And there was a shocking other spike, in fact, an even larger spike than when UI UX first came into the landscape just last year, when companies started realizing, because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic, that simply relying on the only physical interfaces that they have with customers, with stakeholders, is not enough. So therefore, again, there was a huge interest in UI UX as companies started realizing that, hey, we need to now design the way we talk to customers and the way we talk to stakeholders differently, right? So UI UX is a very young field. Everything we will tell you about UI UX today, everything you will learn about UI UX as part of any curriculum is only going to come from just about 10 or 11 years of us realizing how beneficial it has been to businesses. What you should take away from that as students today is that when you enter your career as UI UX designers, if you're so choose to take this path, a majority of your learning is going to happen after, not going to happen now, right? And that's a really important perspective to take. It's very different from, say, the medical sciences, where a majority of your learning is going to happen before you actually become a doctor. It's very different from becoming a lawyer, where you have hundreds of years of learning material and best practices and evolution that has brought you there. So when you're in this highly dynamic and young space of being a UI UX designer, what we are hoping for the designers of tomorrow to come into the market with is an understanding of not just the technical aspects of UI UX and how is UI UX done, but what is the purpose of UI UX in this day and age, right? What is the value it can bring to humanity and society at large? Let's move on to the next slide. Right, so there is a lot of research that's been done even in this small period of 10 years, right? And I want to share some of these stats with you, because when I learned about them, I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting, right? Research has shown that every $1 invested in user experience, in thinking about user experience, brings $100 in return in the final product, website, app that is built out, right? An app without user experience versus an app with user experience will obviously do not as well as the app with user experience, right? So from a return on investment perspective, companies have understood that the money they invest in user experience is going to come with a huge ROI. Are you, as a UI UX designer, directly responsible for the revenue that a company will clock? Are you, as a UI UX designer, directly responsible for the number of users an app will be able to onboard? Now, there is no direct line to say that, hey, because I created 10 designs, my revenue went up 10x. That's because it's not purely input output. Those 10 designs you created set in motion an entire thought process within the entire team that you're working with that resulted in them being able to create something that would delight customers or delight stakeholders and make that app, make that service, make that interface that much more usable, right? So from a return on investment perspective, it is possibly the most valuable investment any company can make today, which is why UI UX designers are so sought after. There is a reason there's so much interest in UI UX. It's because the business case has been proven. Investing in UX means better top line, means better savings, means better output at the end of the day. Can we go to the next slide? When we think about now, there is a reason I'm looking at millennials specifically, right? Millennials are perhaps the most important target audience when we think about digital experiences today. They are the ones most familiar with the internet. They are the ones who have, they are the ones who, when they thought about ordering food online, didn't think twice, right? So it's very important to recognize that 61% of millennials are happy to share even the most personal data if it leads to a more personalized in-store or online shopping experience, right? And in fact, forget shopping experience. Today, we will share data that we may think that we may consider unthinkable many years ago with an Instagram, with a Facebook, and we'll continue sharing it with them, even though we know we don't want these companies to use it because they're able to take that data and delight us with something, right? They're able to use that data about us and show us reels that will keep us scrolling on the Instagram app for hours on end. That will entertain us, right? So, and this is no surprise. This is what good UI UX does. Let's go to the next slide. Amazon, right? Everybody's heard of this company. It's done an incredible job. It is possibly one of the most important companies in this day and age. So, in fact, when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, before they spent any money on advertising, they really spent money on user experience. And I'd love to talk to you about a few things that Amazon got really right when they started, right? When Amazon started, they only focused on selling one category of products. Do you all know what that category is?
Books.
Books, exactly, right? And there's a reason that they chose books. It wasn't just a business insight, right? User experience research led them to say, hey, this might be a great category for us to start with. Why? Because user experience taught them that when a customer was going to try and find a book, they had very limited options of the bookstores available to them, right? Bookstores had physical limitations on how many books they could contain. Obviously, those physical limitations meant that every bookstore could not carry the entire variety of books and topics that a customer might be interested in. So it was a very important insight that Jeff Bezos picked up on, saying, hey, books is a great category for me to start because this is the category where customers are most dissatisfied with the options they have available to them, right? In addition to choosing books as a category, which was a strategically very valuable decision, right? One other thing Amazon did really well was they realized that when people were buying books, when people were purchasing things online, they were not really purchasing them the way you would go shopping offline, right? When you'd go shopping to a store, you would go with the mindset of buying a bunch of things, right? Initially, they assumed that the same behavior would translate online, and people would go into the Amazon website, add a bunch of things to their cart, and they would check out all of those things together. But very early into Amazon's life cycle, they realized that most of the purchases that were made for a single item. It was one book at a time, right? And this is obvious because at that time, people were not used to buying things online, right? Go 10 years ago today, before today, and think about how hesitant you would be to even give your credit card details online. Versus look at where we are today, and we're so fast and loose with our financial information that, yeah, we're very comfortable with it. All of that is user experience insight, right? All that is user research at work. And it was with that insight that Amazon, what they now call, patented the idea of single click, where Amazon was one of the first websites to enable you to buy a book in a single click journey. Whereas all the other websites back then, right, whether it was eBay, whether it was anybody else who was on this space of selling something, would have the same traditional offline user experience of you coming, picking a bunch of books, adding them to your cart, going to checkout, putting in your shipping details, and checking out. In the context of the internet, that's a really long time to make a purchase. Amazon was able to pick up on that user insight because of user research. I don't even think they were calling it user research at that time. Looking back, we now identify it as user research, right? So customer experience, user experience, same thing, has paid off in a massive amount for Amazon and continues to pay off in a massive amount for Amazon. Let's move forward, Manda. More stats, right? And I'm sure this is all of y'all can sort of relate to this. If you have an unpleasant experience, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's in a store, whether it's online, you're not going to go back, right? Even if you got what you were looking for, if it was painful for you to get, you are just not going to do it again with the same company. You are not going to work with someone who is difficult. This is what user experience is trying to do. It's trying to understand what does difficulty mean for a customer or for a user when they are using your app or service, right? And it is no surprise that 67% of customers will not go back. They will bounce, they will leave the service, they will let go of the brand entirely if they have an unpleasant experience. This is the value of UI UX, making sure that we are able to design a pleasant experience for customers without us actually knowing who these customers are, right? Let's move forward, Nanda.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we have heard a lot of times from different people and different within our friend groups also that this experience was really great. I enjoyed booking on Book My Show, or this was a really cool experience. I booked my order within minutes, right? So what is this that people are talking about? What is this UX and what is this UI? Right? So most of the people misunderstand this. Like is UX and UI the same, or whether they are the same, whether they're the same parts of the same process. But to be honest, these two things mean really different, right? In a process, these two things really matter, and these two things, when come together in harmony, they create a beautiful and usable product for the user, right? So let's just get into a little details about what actually UX means, right? So UX is basically coined by Don Norman, right? So what he says about UX is user experience encompasses all aspects of end users' interaction with the company and its service. And it's basically he talks that UX is the user's interaction with the company's production service. Right? Now, if you really observe on this definition, all right, so it does not mention anywhere that it is related to tech or whether it is related to digital. There is no mention of apps. There is no mention of websites anywhere in it. So this is basically a holistic definition of what user experience is, right? And Don Norman further says that, regardless of its medium, right, UX design encompasses all interactions between a potential or an active customer and a product or a service. Right? Now, let's just see what user experience means in a physical space and in a digital space. Right? So, as you mentioned, that it's a scientific process, right? So it can be applied to anything that can be experienced. Right? So these are some examples that we have put into. So let's say a street lamp, right? So there is a reason why this street lamp has been made in such a way, because see that there are two lights, one on the left and one on the right. So there is a reason. So maybe the creator must have thought that the light should reach all the 360-degree area around the lamp. So this might be the reason why they designed with the two lamps in it. If you see the car's dashboard, that is also part of the user experience. What if I interchange the wiper switch with the indicator switch? I mean, it would be a real mess, I mean, people are used to having the switches at the right places when they drive a car. But this is all about the experience. So the car's dashboard is also one of the examples of a user experience. And you can also see like an in-store experience, right? So whenever you go into the store, right, are you able to navigate the store to the place where you want to buy certain products that you want, right? This is also part of the user experience. And now in this era, in this age, there are different kinds of mediums that are available in store that makes you shop with ease, right? And there are also these really highly equipped touch interfaces where you can navigate yourself to a particular point in a mall. All right. So this is also an example of a user experience, right? When you go to a place or to a mall or to a store. And then there's a coffee machine, right? So coffee machine, like you physically interact with it to brew a coffee, right? So this is also an experience. So these are some examples of how user experience can be, right? So this process can be applied to anything that can be experienced. Right? Now if you see, however, I mean, despite of this being a scientific term, from its inception, right, this has been actively used by the tech industry it is actually used in the digital field. Therefore, it is more prominently, this term is being used as UX, and it is mostly related to the tech and the UI, the apps and the website. Right? So like you see, there is an example of a user interface for the Amazon. There is also an app for Netflix. So this is how it relates to the digital field. Right? Now you might be curious, what does a UX designer actually do? Right? So let's just dive into what the UX designer actually does. So like you see, like we also discussed initially, like the user, it's all about creating experience, right? So what a UX designer does, he creates experiences for the user or the customer, right? He also observes how a user uses a product, right? And also while the user is going through a certain task, or while, for example, let's say if user is going through a checkout process on a website, right? Or buying a subscription on a Netflix, right? So what happens is, the user experience designer designs these experiences. They give it to the users, they test these experiences, and they understand, how the users are performing and going from point A to point B. Are they facing any hurdles? Are they facing any problems? And their main job is to, simplify these and allow the users to reach from point A to point B with ease, without any thinking, right? There should not be any cognitive load on the user. They should reach point A to point B without any hesitation. Right now, let's just see what actually is UX designer in a digital space, all right? So if like we also talked about earlier, like a checkout experience, like you see, how is the checkout process when shopping online? So like you see in this example, like there is at the top there are three ways where users get to know that where they are. Like I'm filling the shipping information, then I'm proceeding to the payment. All right. So user knows where he is. All right, and he also knows where he has to go next. Right? So this is just an example of how a checkout can be done really easily. If you go next, like if you see this particular example was really popular. I mean, is it easy for you to search or type a website address in your browser? I mean, while I use a mobile, I definitely feel it's a tedious task to go at the top of the mobile, type in, come back when the keyboard opens, type in search term and click on search. So it's just like, it's very difficult to go back and forth from the top to bottom. All right. So what Apple did it brought down the browser and the browser bar at the bottom. So it's easier for the users to type in there than the text box open and search in quickly. All right. So this is just an example of user experience in terms of application.
If we could just spend a minute on this. So, I mean, this was a very controversial decision by Apple, right? I mean, there are as many articles about how people hate this move as they are how people love this move.
Yeah.
But this is what Apple gets so right? They're able to, they know that they are building bigger and larger phones, and they know that your thumb is not going to grow at the rate that the iPhone is going to grow. So it was but obvious for Apple to realize that, my thumb is not going to stretch all the way to the top of the phone anymore. The phone is going to get larger. Let's move that browser bar down. So even this is a great example of how a company as large as Apple is taking user experience research very seriously, and is now going to change not just the way people interact with their devices, but it's going to change the way people like Mandar and I will start designing websites in the future. They literally have turned it over its head, right? So UX, the impact of UX is just so large that no amount of examples or no amount of numbers can tell you how it's going to affect in a positive or a negative way any business process.
Yes, definitely. All right. So now that we have spoken about digital space, now let's just talk about physical space. Right? User experience also exists in physical space. Like how is it easy for you to grip a vegetable peeler? As simple as that. I mean, this is like a really simple example that happens in our day-to-day life. How is it easy for you to use and operate an ATM machine? Right? So these are the examples of users interacting with an experience in a physical space. So in a nutshell, right? So UX design is the process of developing and improving the interaction between a user, a product, and a service, right? So user experience in theory, even if it's a science, right, it is largely used in digital industry. Therefore, it is more popular, and that is why we relate UX and UI to websites and applications, right? And the third point is basically UX is not about visuals, Right? So when we think about UX, right, we don't usually think about visual. It is basically what happens at the backstage. Right? Whatever you see in the front is about the user interface, which we're coming to next. Right? But UX for now just focuses on the overall experience and how it is easy for the user to accomplish a particular task or a particular goal about a product or a service. Okay? Now, let's just jump into UI design, right? So, what is UI design? All right, UI stands for user interface. All right. Now, I told you that what the experience is, right? What a user experiences when using a product or interacting with a product. But there should be medium, right, for users to interact with that experience. Right. So, user interface designing is a medium that acts as a point of interaction. So, let's say like we interact with a mobile app, right? Like we interact with a website. So, this is a medium. That is basically is called as a user interface. So what does UI design consist of? Right? It considers the look, the feel, and how we interact with the product. Right? So it is all about how fonts have been laid out, how are the colors on the website, what is the logo color, what are the buttons, how is the interaction going on the website, right? So this is all about UI design. Now, what does a UI designer do? Right? So UI designer carefully considers each and every visual interactive element that user might encounter, right? So like you see in this particular example, the designer has carefully added the title that you see, like the Roman sculpture. So the users can understand this is something about sculpting, right? Then he has carefully chosen these small images that really flow nicely in the form of a carousel. Carousel is basically something that moves with the user interaction, right? So this is basically the images that he has aligned. There are different sculptures for this particular piece, right? And when you come down, you can see that these are exhibitions, right? And you can book exhibition. Now he has added exhibitions tab. Now he has added different locations where the exhibition can be, and then he has also added a button to interact with it and to buy or purchase the tickets. So this is basically one example. Another example would be an app like a calendar or a to-do calendar where you can plan things out. So like you see, the designer has made this like into a new and retro feel. He has added multiple colors to it, right? And then when you click on particular day, you go into a detailed page where you see all these details about that particular day. All right. So this is basically an app interface. Going next, a UI designer can, so what you saw right now actually was like the combination of these things. All right. So UI designer first thinks about icons, buttons, typography. So typography is basically a collection of fonts that can be used on a website or on an app. It talks about color schemes. So there are different color schemes, all right? So like you see in this lesson, there is a gold, there is a deep gray, and there is a white. So we can use this color scheme in different ways on the website or an app, right? And it also talks about iconography. So if you see on the right-hand side, we have these small icons that are being developed. So we use these icons at different places on our interface, on different pages. And there is also something called as photography or art direction. So how would be a particular image treated when it is placed on the website? So we usually don't download images from the Shutterstock or free image platforms and directly put it on the website. The image needs to be treated. It needs to be treated to align it with the brand guidelines or the brand's vision and brand style guide so that it comes in sync with the brand, right? And UI designer also thinks about responsive design. So what you saw was a desktop, and the next you saw was a mobile. So adapting the same version of the desktop to the mobile is also what UI design is. Right? So this was all about UI design. Now, apart from whatever we talked right now, UI designer is also responsible for a couple of other things. He needs to also think of these things while designing the interface. Right? So first of all is design research. So he needs to think, or he needs to do a little bit of research about the brand, what the brand is, where the brand is coming from, to what audience I'm designing for, right? And this is basically the part of design research. Then comes the development feasibility, right? So whatever I design, of course, should be able to be developed, right? So it should be, after I design, I should be able to give it to the developers and they should be able to code that particular piece what I have designed. For example, let's say if I've designed something and I've told the developer, that button or that images are going to disappear or going to fly somewhere, that is not going to happen because that is not possible in the development phase, right? So there are certain guidelines or there are certain ways that development happen, and we have to abide to that, right? We just cannot do anything we feel would be best, right? So this is the development feasibility. There are other certain design guidelines that the brand might have. Right? The brand might say, my logo color is blue. So you should be using blue in the interface a lot of times. Even your major primary color should be blue. And then you can use gold or red or other colors, which would be the second color. So these are the guidelines, that come in from the brand team. And there are other guidelines that are there, which are design principles. Just to give an example, we have a design principle called CRAP. Literally, CRAP is a design principle. What does CRAP mean? It means consistency, repetition, alignment, and proximity. So these are basically design guidelines that we have to follow while we design an interface. And last but not least, the content. Content is the key, right? So whatever you see or whatever you read on the website, you should use the same content that is written by a UX writer or a content writer, because a lot goes into writing content, right? Everything depends on content. Everything depends on conversations what are happening on the website. If I don't tell you in a right way what the website is for, there is no use of that design, right? So content is a main piece that UI designers always consider while using in the design. Also, in a nutshell, so user interface is purely a digital graphic, all right? It considers all visual interactive elements for product interface. The goal of UI design is to visually guide users for product interface without having them to think. So there should not be a confusion. Alright, so users must not think twice, thrice before navigating through an interface. Right? It should be clear and precise. And UI design transfers a brand strengths and visual assets to a product interface. It should basically transfer what the brand has to say about the product, and you should abide with that and use the same in the UI design. You should impart that into your design. So now that we have seen that, what is UX, what is UI, but there might be a question that you guys might be having. How does this work together, right? How does these two different fields come together to create a product, right? And you might be thinking that, one is better than other, one is better than other. You might be thinking that, UX is more important than UI, but that is not the case, right? UX and UI both are really crucial to a product in a product life cycle, right? So there's a expert called Elga Mod, she says that something that looks great but is difficult to use is an exemplary of great UI but poor UX, while something very usable that looks terrible is exemplary of a great UX and a poor UI, right? So what is UI UX and how does this work together? Basically, we have to maintain a harmony in between these two. These two cannot work in silos. You have to think about UX while doing UI, and you have to think about UI while doing UX. Right? And users basically are the thing when you basically get into UX. And all of the visual elements, all of these that we spoke about is really important when we spoke about UI. So let us see what is good UX and bad UX. Right? So let us take an example. Okay. So you come up with a brand, all right? You come up with an idea that you have to make an application. Right? It's a really unique idea. There is no product in the market like that, and it is definitely going to be useful to the user. Right? So what are you going to do while creating this product? So as a part of the process, you will do a user research. Right? So you will research who will be using this app, who are the users, what are their demographics, how they will be using this app. Right? So you'll do a user research to think about what the users are. Then you will create a feature list. So what this app will consist of, what all different features this app will consist of, and how the users will navigate through these features. Right? How I, as a user, will be using feature A, feature B, feature C, things like that. So that is basically called as a user journey. How I'm going to go from feature A to feature B to my end journey. Right? And then eventually, what you will do is you will create wireframes, you will create designs, and you will publish your app. All right? You are really confident that this is really going to work. Now, what happens is when you push your app on App Store and Google Store, and when people actually download it, what you get to know is really different. The picture is really different. The text on each screen is barely legible. When people start downloading your app and start using it, they feel that, I'm not able to read a text, because what we have done in design is basically we have put in a yellow text on a white background. I mean, God Lord, who will be able to read that? And the buttons are really too small and close to each other. What if I click on a button and I accidentally have a button side to it? There might be a possibility that I click on both the buttons at once, but nothing happens. For the people who find reading a difficulty to read, the font sizes in the app are really not readable. They are really small, right? So these all problems is going to bring down the sales. This is going to bring down the download, and this is going to affect your revenue. So this is a classic case of bad UI destroying a good UX. All right, you did everything you can for the UX, but because of the bad UI, everything has gone to fail. All right. Let's just see the other way around. All right, what is a good UI and a bad UX? Okay, you build a website that has really good looking animation, like you see in the example on the right hand side. It has really good font. It has really good color. It has really good animation. It is really nice in terms of visual experience, right? But it lacks certain things, right? It lacks usability. So when I come on to this first example, I don't know where should I go. There is no CTA, right? There is no correct messaging. I don't know what the website is about, right? And there is no user understanding. We do not know what to do on this website. Similarly, in this case of the second example, like the typography is on point, but can you guys even know what this website is for? We cannot even guess what this website is for, because it is not mentioned over anywhere. Just like, what does the website do? What I have to do? There are no CTAs. So this is an example of bad UX destroying what could have great good UI. So let's just talk about what do UI UX designers do, right? So let's just put this into a summary and see with the help of industry related terms, what do UI UX designers do? So now if you see, like there are certain things that UX designer does, there are certain things that UI designer does, and there is an overlap, right? So let's just go quickly through each of these, like a quick summary of each of these. So first, what UX design does is a competitor analysis. Right? So in order to create any product, what I'll first do is I'll see what the competition is doing. Right? How is the competition? What the competition is doing? What are the features the competition has? Right? This is basically the competitor analysis. Then I'll analyze the customer and the user. Who are the users who are going to come on this website? This is really critical. Who are the users you are designing for? Right? Then there is UX writing. So like we said, content is king, right? So the UX writing is basically how you put forth the message on the website, right? It needs to be really conversational. If I don't give you content that intrigues you to explore the interface, there is no use of such interface. So I cannot just say this content, like UX writing is really one of the most important aspects of the process. Then comes the product structure and the strategy. So how are you going to structure your product? What are the things the product will consist of? All right, and how these things are going to flow? What would be the business goal? What would be the user goal? All of this will be added in the product strategy and structure. And then comes in the prototyping and wireframing. All right, so prototype is basically a pre-built version of your app or a website where the users can navigate. All right, so what we basically do in our design tools like Figma, Adobe XD, there's a provision for you to connect designs to each other. So in real life, when you export such prototype, you'll feel that you are actually using that website or actually using that app. So what it allows us to do is, it allows us to test that actual users and gain their insights and gain their feedback on what we are designing. And wireframing is basically a blueprint of what we are designing. Then what we do is, UX design does is test and iterate. Like I said, we give the prototypes to the users to test. If the user says, no, I'm not able to navigate from point A to point B, so then there's a problem in that particular area, right? So then we come back, we test those interface, we make a different version of it, and then again it goes into the prototyping. So this is like a process, right? So we have to do this every time we face a problem. And then the last is really also important, that coordination with UI designers and developers. So, like I said, these things cannot work in silo. We have to be in coordination with the designers who are working on the project. We have to be in coordination with the developers who are working on the project. Because at a lot of times we design something or suggest something that might not be feasible technologically, right? So it's really important to have this coordination. And what does UI designers do, right? So they understand what is UX, right? This is like a basic thing that they should understand how the UX works, what are the UX processes, and how the research works, right? They should also be knowing about the customer, right? They should be knowing what the customer is and who they are designing for. And there would be design research, like we also earlier talked about design research, that they should do design research before even into design. They should also be well versed with branding and illustrations. So there are at times where you have to create your illustration for a particular client where they demand illustrations or they demand branding. You must have a basic idea of how the illustrations and branding are created. Then comes UI prototyping. Like similarly, like we did in UX, same is done in UI. So once we do the wireframing and prototyping, like it's like a basic structural model of a prototype. Similarly, it is done in UI. So when we design final pages, we create a prototype for it and send it to the client, the users to test, right? And then interactivity and animation. So there are times when we have to create certain things that move. That we should make developers understand that this thing should be like this, right? So when I hover on the button, the color of the button should change to a darker shade. Right? So that is basically interactivity and animation. And of course, responsive design. How our interface adjusts itself from our desktop interface to a mobile interface, and the implementation with the developer. So when we finish designing something, we send all of these things, all of the assets that we have in a particular format to the developer so that they can take those design elements and assets and actually develop a product with it. All right. And if you see at the center, there is like an overlap in between these two. All right. So these are the things that UX and UI designers should always think about while doing their work. Right? They should think about design thinking. They should be aware of what user wants, right? And the goal. This should be like really at the heart of each of these, like product that delights user. So whatever I do, whatever decision I make, I should understand that what the decision should delight user, right? So this is like an overview of UX, UI, and how there is overlap in between these two. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thanks, Mandar. I think that was great, and I loved all the examples. Before we move forward, are there any questions I would like to ask at this stage, or we can even do a Q&A at the end of this deck? Would anyone like to get into anything at this point? Okay, cool. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about our process, right? And the reason I wanted to sort of bring this up is, as we said, UI UX in India has only been around for 10 years. I founded this company 11 years ago. So we have, over the time when we started UI UX design within the company, we didn't really have a playbook. We didn't really have any way of which, how do you actually create a process out of all the various steps that Mandar spoke about, right? There's so many things that a UX designer or UI designer and how they interact with other members of the team that one has to consider to be able to create this into a seamless experience, not just for the designer, but even for the person you are collaborating with, right? So Noesis is a services company, right? We work with multiple brands. Each brand has multiple stakeholders. Each stakeholder will have multiple opinions. In a product company, similarly, you'll be working with multiple stakeholders, taking their understanding and trying to create a design that's going to solve for all of their problems. And that's a really challenging and daunting thing to do. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we've learned over the last decade of doing UI UX and why we do UI UX the way we do. The first thing that's very important to understand and to make any stakeholder that you work with understand about UI UX is that the visual component of UI UX, what most people consider as your output, your deliverable, the actual design is the tail end of the process, right? In fact, in my head, 10% of the actual effort, it's only 10% of the effort that leads to 100% of the output, which is the actual design that somebody sees. The remaining 90% of the work is everything we need to understand to come up with that design. So here's the process we follow. the first thing we do is we work with either our client or we work with our stakeholders to understand what are their goals for what we are building. Say there's somebody who wants to build a website, or there's somebody who wants to build a mobile application. Very often people will come to you with very specific things saying, hey, my website should have this. My mobile app should be able to do this. What we often do is we take a step back and say, okay, you're trying to do my job for me by telling me what the website should have. Can you first help me understand why you want a website in the first place? Who is this website for? Why do you as a business need a website? And how will you 1 year from now measure whether or not this website was successful for you or not? It is very important that us as designers understand why we are doing something before we actually start doing it, right? And it's very equally important for us to get our stakeholders, the people we are designing with, our clients, our partners, our colleagues, right? For themselves to answer, why are you building this app? You're not building this app just for a bunch of features, right? You're building this app for a larger business purpose or just for a larger purpose in general. So the first part of the entire engagement for us is really understanding why are we doing this, right? We want to be onboarded to the brand. What is the brand's value? What is the brand's promise to people out there? And what is ultimately the reason for existence of this project, right? Which is what we call design strategy. We do this through a bunch of workshops, right? We will take together various stakeholders from our clients team. We will ask them very controversial questions. We will design the questions to make conflict in the room, because through that conflict, we'll be able to get to a point where people will say, yes, this is why we are doing something, right? If, what we'll see later, if we have time today in today's session, we've worked with companies like Midday, 100+ year old publication out there. We recently finished the revamp of Hindware Homes, which is India's largest bathroom wear accessories. And obviously, these companies have come with a bunch of stakeholders. And our first meeting with them after we came on board, we simply asked all of them, hey, what does success for this project mean to you? And no surprise, every single person had a different answer. And that was a great way for us to start this project, because all of those stakeholders realized that, okay, we really need to be aligned on why we are doing this before we can just go out there and start approving designs. So the first phase is about understand. Now, if in the first phase, we have spent time understanding our stakeholders' perspective, right, or understanding our client's perspective, the second part of our process is research, which is let us understand the perspective of the people we're actually designing for. Am I designing for the brand manager whose website I'm creating? No, I'm designing for that brand manager's customer. Now, up till this phase, in the understand part, I've only spent time understanding what the business wants. The business wants this, the business wants that, the business wants customers to do that, right? But okay, great. I know ultimately the business is the one paying me to do something. I really need to make sure I understand what the customer wants in order for me to create something that's going to work for the business. So when I look at the customer side, and I'm using the term customer here loosely, right? The same process will work for an NGO, will work for a not-for-profit context, will work for something that there isn't a transaction. Ultimately, who is the end user of my design, right? How am I solving that person's problems? So in the second phase, we want to capture and represent the voice of the end user in this entire process. Our third phase then becomes about putting both of these different pieces together. What does the client want? What does the business want? Or what do we as a company want? What do our stakeholders want? What do the people that we are designing this for want? And where is the overlap, right? So the way we do research, as you can see on the slide, we'll do interviews. Either we'll do interviews by actually cold calling people from the same target audience. We will do broad-based surveys, right? We will even benchmark if the client you're designing for or the service you're building is in a competitive space. We will look at what are other people doing in the same space, right? In the analyze phase, we take all of this data and we start creating something we call user personas. A user persona is nothing but a fictitious end user that we are going to use as our buddy in the design process, right? So we'll make a user persona called Sachin Tendulkar, and we'll say, hey, will Sachin like this? Will Sachin like that? Will Sachin use this every day? And if the answers are not in line, then that provides us with the guiding principle of what we should and should not do, right? The most important part of the user persona is for us to really be able to understand what are the goals and the frustrations that a user faces today before my solution exists. Say that I'm designing something for somebody to find insurance policies online. I really need to understand when the end user is searching for insurance policy, what frustrates them, right? Is it the sheer technical information that they're thrown at? Is it the sheer, oh, if you do this, you won't get that? Is it just the sheer volume of information that they have? And of course, what is the goal? Ultimately, the guy just wants to be secure. The person I'm designing for is buying insurance because they just want to feel secure. They just want to make sure that, hey, when bad things happen, I'm going to be okay, right? So when you take that insight and then you blend it with the business objectives, you're going to be able to have a lot of insight on how you're going to be able to create the actual design with that user persona. And now that you've got everybody on board, you can now create that sitemap, right? Which is effectively what are the various pages or the various paths that are going to constitute my website, my mobile application, whatever it is that I'm designing. From that, we move to something called information architecture. And we're going to show you examples of what these documents look like. The information architecture is a step forward from the sitemap that basically says on each page, what are the different components of information or what are the communication objectives I have for every single interface that forms part of my website or part of my app. Now, finally, after all of this is done, right, that is when you actually start putting color into pixels, right? And this is what shocks most people when they first see this. Like, oh, I thought design is just you creating a bunch of designs, giving me Photoshop layouts, and I'll give you an approval on it. That's not at all the way UI UX design works. Design actually comes at the end, right? And it is the culmination of everything we've learned through the understand, research, and analyze process that will then lead us to create an interface that actually works. Great. Next slide. I want to spend a few minutes talking about user research, right? Mandar has spoken about this. I've spoken about this as part of our process. What does it mean to do? What does user research actually mean, right? You want to understand what your users want. You want to go and ask them, hey, do you like something? That kind of sounds obvious, right? That's actually not what user research is at all, right? Mandar, next slide. When you do user research without the user, right, you just shouldn't do it, right? One way of doing user research most people will think about is let me create a design and let me go and ask a bunch of users what they think about this design. And that's a terrible idea because users are not inherently, your end user does not know whether a design is going to work for them or not. They might say aesthetically, this looks good. And yeah, I would use something that looks like this. But at that point in time, they're just looking at a picture of something. They don't know how they're going to interact with it. They don't know what state of mind they're going to be in when they're actually going to use your product or service. They don't even know what questions they're going to have, right? So if you just start thinking about doing research without really considering who your users are and why they are looking for a particular service, right? You're going to go wrong. Users are obviously at the heart of user-centered design. And that does not mean that users are going to answer design questions for you. Users are not going to tell you what is the right color combination to use. Users are not going to tell you whether layout A is better than layout B. Users are not going to tell you what image looks better at the top of that page, right? That's not a user's job. Users can tell you what their problems are. And it is our job as designers to be empathetic towards users and understand what is a user's problem, because that is the input that I need to be able to design a solution, right? Let's see how this actually plays out in the real world, right? It is important to recognize that you are not the user you are creating. We are all digital natives, right? We are very used to understanding that, hey, I'm supposed to click on this button. We are very used to understanding how a website is supposed to work. But the next billion users of the internet, the people you will be designing for, are people who have not been introduced to the internet the same way you have. They may never even use Google. Their introduction to the internet might in fact be WhatsApp. Their preferred choice of interface might be a chat interface or a search interface, right? Now, when you start thinking about that, you sort of start realizing the amount of bias that gets built into a process just because you are going to design something you think is usable. But what you think is usable may not necessarily be what the end user you are creating for is usable. It's very important as a designer to take yourself out of the equation and say, hey, my job here is not to create something that I will be able to use. unless of course you are the target audience. My job here is to create something that my end user will be able to use, right? That's why know thy user, and you are not thy user. If you go to the next slide. So this is one of my favorite graphics when it comes to work, my favorite comic strips, right? I've seen this play out time and time again, and this is really capturing the essence of understanding stakeholders who you are working with. If you look at the, where you start off from, if you go and ask the customer, what do you want? They might very well explain it to you in that manner, right? Oh, I want a swing that has 3 stacks on it so I can sit, climb, and hold the sides. Your project leader or whoever is going to convert this customer requirement to you and give it to you is going to give you a completely different perspective on it. The engineer is going to understand completely something else and design something completely different, right? He's going to have to come up with different ways to support this tree and cut the actual base off. The programmer will do a completely different aspect on this. The salesperson, whose job is it to make it look like you've created the best thing possible, is going to go and give the customer a whole different expectation. How was your project documented? It wasn't. It was just a bunch of expectations that got transferred from person to person. What did the operations team actually do? Half the job. How did you build your customer? How did you spend your time? Like a roller coaster. What did you think about in terms of support? Nothing. And ultimately, what did the customer really want? They just wanted a tire on a swing. That was it, right? So very often we need to sort of look at the requests, or we need to sort of look at what clients are coming to us with, or look at what your boss is asking you to design and strip it away, break it down, challenge the brief that is coming to you, challenge what you are being asked to do, and say, wait, am I really understanding what you are asking me to do? Is this what they really want? How do I get there? Right. So it's very important to keep this in mind. Let's go to the next slide. So again, user understanding is not asking people what they want. Okay. If you ever get a user survey or some sort of market research that asks you, would you like to have a feature that does X? That's a terrible survey. Nobody is going to say no. Why would I not want to have a feature that has X? Give me all the features in the world, right? The question is, how is that feature of X going to actually solve a problem for you, right? Some of the greatest entrepreneurs we know were actually great because they were fantastic UX designers. One of them, a personal hero of mine, Steve Jobs, I'm sure you all can tell, we're all Apple fans over here, right? He said this very clearly. It's not the customer's job to know what they want. It's our job to create the solution that fits into the customer's life, right? Another great entrepreneur, Henry Ford, right? Inventor, UX designer. I'm sure you all have heard this quote, and if you all haven't, you all will repeat this through your career a bunch of times. Is if he went out there asking people what they wanted at that time when they weren't cars, people would have said, "Oh, we want faster horses. We want horses that can go a longer distance," right? But that's not what Henry Ford did, right? He understood who his people were. He understood where the world was moving. And he was able to say, hey, the time for the internal combustion engine is here. Motor cars are going to be the future. Of course, there's an element of risk. User research is not de-risking your business plan. User research is not going to de-risk what decision you're taking as an entrepreneur. It's just going to help guide you make better decisions, right? Henry Ford could have been terribly wrong, but he took the risk, right? And he was right. So customers can very easily describe their problems. In fact, they are great at it. If you ask a customer what pisses you off about company A, they'll give you lines and lines and pages and pages of words for you to use, right? But in the case of Henry Ford, wanting to get the problem was they want to get somewhere faster was not the best solution, right? Let's move forward. So a lot of times I have faced this brief that, oh, we want a design that is universal, that is going to work for everyone. And you'll get this a lot, right? Build me something so easy, everyone can use it. Nothing like that exists. People are different, right? Designing something for everyone is like designing something for no one. Or it's like designing for anyone is like packing a trip to nowhere, right? Can you really pack a trip to nowhere? Would you really be able to carry warm clothes, cold clothes, beach clothes, spacesuits at some point in the near future? Because even that might be a trip you'd be able to take realistically, right? So without knowing how long you plan to stay, without knowing what activities you're going to be doing, without knowing the weather that your destination will be in, how can you actually pack your trip? And that's the same concept you're going to use as a designer. If you're going to design a product for everyone that can do anything, you're literally designing nothing, right? Then you're just filling out a checklist somebody has given to you and say, fine, you wanted 35 features, I've given them to you. Is it going to work for the business? Probably not, right? Um, Great. Let's move forward. I know we're sort of running out of time. We're going to speed through the remaining slides. Mandar, you want to take this from here?
So now that we have talked about user and we have known the importance of the user researches and how prime it is in this entire process of developing a product, all right? So there are certain methods that we use to know these users, right? So these methods are really practical. We actually use it in our project that we actually do. So this would be really effective for you all to know that what these processes are and how these are used to know what our users see and what he's expecting and what are these pain points, etc. Right? So let's just dive deep into what these processes are in detail. Right? So let's just focus on the first and the second, that is the questionnaires and surveys and user interviews. Right? So these are like small questions or a set of questions that we send specifically pointing to the user. All right. So this is just an example that you have seen. Right. So how do you first learn about our product or website? So these are really simple questions that are targeted to the user. Okay. So these questions help us to understand the main points that the users have or they face problems with or are expecting, etc. So
just a point. These questions will change from every project you all will do, right? There is no standard set of questions you can ask a user. You have to keep in mind, what is the project I'm working on? What is the space I'm on? Creating the questionnaire itself is a very important aspect of this entire process.
Yes. And the same can be done in a different way. That is called as a user interview. That there can be 1:1 interview. There can be group interviews where we talk to the stakeholders, to the users, and ask this question to them on a call or in person. Right? So these are two different methods that we use to know the user. Let's just move ahead. So there is another method known as Streamline Diagram. Right. So what does a Streamline Diagram basically? It's like a flow chart. Right. So it outlines what user does in a particular process, or what is the role of a particular user in a particular situation. So like you see in this particular example, that is currently using a student at this particular point of time. It will registration form, right? And when it submits a registration form, it will go where? It will go to administration. It will go to administrator, right? Then he'll check, all right, is the form complete? Yes, no. And then he'll put in, if it's no, then again, he'll send a message to the user saying, your form is incomplete. And if it's yes, all right, then it will go to a registration office. They'll review the registration and so on and so forth. So this is basically like how what will happen at a particular user point and how it will move ahead from that.
So Streamline diagrams are extremely powerful to understand where, let's say that you have a workflow that involves multiple stakeholders in that workflow, right? So in this case, somebody is approving the admission form, somebody is checking it, somebody's whatever. So when you as a user experience designer is thinking about how will my entire system work, both internally and externally, Streamline diagrams are great at sort of just making sure that you have accounted for what the different stakeholders require within your experience for the entire workflow to go smoothly, right? They are an evolved version of a flowchart. You're familiar with what flowcharts are. The problem with flowcharts is that they're very linear. And in most cases, flowcharts are single stakeholder perspectives, right? You will look at a flowchart from one user's perspective. Okay, user will do this, 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 this. But a swim lane diagram allows you to overlay what are the other pieces of the application, what are the other pieces of the ecosystem that need to be involved in the user workflow that you're designing at that time. And keep in mind that the different lanes in the swim lane, they don't have to be actual people. You might even have an internal process that the engineering team has to build to do something with the input that the user is providing before it goes to some other stakeholder, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. Then comes a user persona, right? So whatever we had got to know from the previous steps, right? So what we do is we take that data Alright, and we create fictional characters. Like Siddharth also said previously, and we create persona. And this is our go-to guide when we design interfaces and take certain design decisions. Right? So whenever I have to design certain experience or design certain interface, right, I'll come back to this persona, all right, and I'll see what the persona's pain point is, or what motivates him or what frustrates him, and I'll according to that I'll take my decision in terms of experience and in terms of user interface.
Happy to answer any questions.
So what are the job roles if you're not really, not really a graphic designer? Usually what I've noticed is graphic designers go in for UI towards later on. So for a non-graphic designer, would it be more feasible to start with UX, the UX aspects of it?
Sure. Mandar, do you want to share something on that?
Yeah, sure. So see, whenever there is someone who wants to jump from graphic design to UX, first of all, I mean, I'm really glad that that person knows what UX is. I mean, definitely he wants to move into UX. I mean, he certainly has some interest in that particular field, right? But there are certain companies that offer two different roles, like a UX designer role and a UI designer role. And there are some companies who offer like a generalist role where you have to do UX as well as UI. Right. So I think if the person definitely is more interested in how users are, how to design experiences for particular users, and not interested in the visual part of it, so I'll suggest he definitely should be going to UX.
So also to add to that, Keith, see, you have to, when somebody is studying graphic design, ultimately they're actually studying how do you communicate through a graphical medium, right? Even a user, so I've seen a lot of people who have come as a graphic designer saying, oh, I can do UI as well. But it's not a direct translation. That just because you're a good graphic designer does not mean that you're going to be a good UI designer. Good graphic designers are great at creating, graphics with messaging on them, great at showcasing a product. So you can, if you still enjoy using the tools like Photoshop or Wireframe or XD or Figma, you can still be a very good UI designer without having actually knowing how to create graphics from scratch, right? Because UI design is about the interface. Graphic design is about what goes inside the interface, if that kind of makes sense. Yeah. I think Annette has a question.
Yes, sir. First of all, I really loved the session. Thank you so much. It was really informative. I wanted to know what role does psychology play in UX and UI, as in how much of psychology, customer, consumer behavior goes into actually, doing market research for it.
Oh, I mean, we can do a whole separate session on this, but absolutely. I think that a UI UX designer with a psychology background might be one of the most powerful people in the digital space today, right? Because ultimately what you're doing is creating something that I mean, you need to understand users. I mentioned the word empathy, right? You need to understand who users are, understand what makes them who they are, what makes them tick. So there is an entire subfield within UI UX, which is called consumer psychology, user psychology. And very often in large companies, so in companies like Google or Facebook, or where you really have extreme differentiation of different inputs, they actually have psychology teams who will work with design teams to say, even something down to what is the right color to use given the right type of audience. So there is a lot of benefit in combining the world of psychology and UI UX. In fact, it will be as powerful as the benefit of combining the world of psychology and marketing or psychology and advertising, right? If you really think about it, the science of understanding people can really lay a bedrock for almost any digital practice, right? So great question. And yeah, it's a very, very powerful combination.
Thank you.
We had basic about UI and UX, but this was a bit depth and got to know about many things. So my question is, the OTT platform, both Netflix and Amazon Prime. So basically, we know that we are Netflix content consumers and some are Amazon Prime content users. So while designing the UI, did they decide the color? It was right in their mind that such kind of a contents would come. So we would keep it white and blue, the Amazon thing, which is very much soft you can say the genres like love story or feel good films, whereas Netflix is more into dark or teen dramas, or you can say some graphic. So does this come right from the designing, or it's later on decided around this genre, so we will try to design a UX or the UI about this same color?
I think it's a very interesting question. Also, Mandar, I didn't let you say anything on the psychology question. If you want to share something on that as well, why don't you
Yeah,
take
yeah.
lead on this and I'll jump in after.
Sure, sure. All right. So I think, see, that is a really great question. I mean, see, like they had first thought about that they'll use a white interface for the experience, right? And then they switched into the black interface, right? So if you see, like whenever you view something online, right, they must have observed that the white that is there, right, it disturbs the content that is around it, right? And the black that is there, it gives you a seamless experience when you view certain things, all right? And there is also a survey that whenever you are designing any interface, all right, for the users who usually work in dark or you work at a night time or a night shift, all right, and they have to essentially use a UI or a interface, all right. So they specifically design these interfaces with a gray background, like a darker gray background, right? Because these backgrounds help them, look at the interface with ease. Right, and even if you compare this with you can say a theater or any other experience, right? Whenever you go into it, definitely switch off the lights, right? And you switch off the lights and you watch it in peace. That like there is nothing else apart from what I'm watching right now.
So one, Harrier, I think that it's important to recognize that you cannot think about UI UX design given the current state of what you think a company is doing. Right now, if you think about Netflix used to rent DVDs. That's where they started, right? So obviously Netflix's branding at that time, the brand team did not have a brief that's saying, hey, make me a logo that today is about renting DVDs and tomorrow will be about streaming. In fact, when Netflix first started, the concept of streaming didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist, right? At that time. So I think that there is a huge brand angle to the question you're asking. It was more about Netflix being able to stand out as a brand against everything else at that time. Netflix's biggest competitor at that time was Blockbuster, which was the local DVD library, right? So I'm guessing at that point they wanted to create a logo or they
The
wanted to create
Blu-ray
a brand
CDs.
identity. Sorry?
The Blu-ray CDs which you would get, rented CDs and DVDs.
Correct. Blockbuster was the company where you'd be able to rent DVDs in America at that time. And Blockbuster, if I remember, was the blue and yellow color scheme. So I think there was definitely a competitive strategy angle there as well. Saying, look, we need something that's going to be familiar, but is going to stand out against our competition at that time, which was Blockbuster, right? So that's more on the identity side. On the interface side, though, I don't think that Amazon Prime and Netflix have designed their interface based on what content they're into today, because that content is going to change, right? In fact, tomorrow, Netflix has already started making investments in streaming games, right? So you don't want to start thinking about creating design very specific to what you're doing today. Your design has to scale. When you talk about scalability in terms of design, you have to think, what are the different ways I might interact with the customer, not just this year, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And also, you have to remember that one of the benefits we have as UI UX designers is it's very easy for us to change interface, right? We're not interior designers and architects that are actually putting up brick and mortar stores. In fact, I would be afraid of being an architect just because how much I would have to commit to a fixed layout or a fixed design. Because if I want to make one change, I have to break a wall. But today, I have to make a change on a website. No big deal, right? So you have to have a healthy commitment to what you're doing, but also recognize that your design does not have to stand the test of time because you can evolve with time, right? So you should keep that in mind.
Thank you, sir.
So I think, guys, sorry, we're really out of time. I don't know about you all, but Mandar and I speak for Mandar, really enjoyed this session. And, we'll share our contact details with you guys. Do reach out, career advice, or just general design conversations. We'd be happy to hear from you all. And best of luck to you all as you all step forth.
Thank you so much, sir. This was a really wonderful session, and I like to thank you again on behalf of the entire class. It was a wonderful overview on UI and UX, and I personally found it really well put together for everyone who's curious about this field.
We really appreciate that. Thanks again for everyone's time, and have a great day.
Thank
Have a great
you.
evening.
Wish
sir.
you the
Thank you,
same.
Siddharth.
Thank you.